Have you ever been alone in the dark? I mean truly alone, when the power dies without warning, that sudden cold blackout, the kind that steals every sound from your home and leaves you breathing in shallow, shaky gasps. You tell yourself it's just a blown fuse, just the weather, but something in your gut whispers that you're not alone. I've collected 3 real accounts, stories sent directly to this channel, from people who experienced a cold blackout and discovered the dark was never empty. These aren't campfire tales, these are true terror files, confessions from ordinary people who now sleep with the lights on. Story 1 comes from a night shift security guard, trapped in a building that should have been empty, but the cold blackout let something else inside. Story 2 follows a mother who heard her child's voice calling from the basement during a power failure, except her daughter was sleeping right beside her. And Story 3, the one that still makes my skin crawl, reveals what happens when a blackout lasts until dawn and the cold never goes away. Right now, wherever you are, maybe your lights are warm and steady, maybe you feel safe, but just imagine that hum of electricity suddenly vanishing, plunging you into freezing, total darkness. What would you do if you heard slow footsteps approaching inside your own silent, lightless room? Stay with me and listen closely, because the first story begins right now. My name is Marcus Hayes, and for 3 years I worked the night shift as a security guard at the Coldwater Business Park, just outside of Erie, Pennsylvania. It's a 7-story concrete office building, mostly dental clinics and insurance call centers on the upper floors, dead quiet after 7 p.m. You'd think guarding an empty building would be boring, and most nights it was. I'd walk my rounds, sip bad coffee from the break room, and stare at a wall of flickering CCTV monitors that never showed anything except dust drifting through empty hallways. But in January of 2023, something happened in that building that made me quit my job, and honestly, it made me afraid of the dark for the rest of my life. The night started like any other cold, bitter cold. A severe winter storm warning had been blaring on the radio all evening, lake effect snow hammering Erie County with temperatures dropping to -15 after midnight. I clocked in at 10 p.m., zipped my heavy parka up to my chin, and gave the departing day guard a casual nod. Old Frank just muttered, "Stay warm, kid, feels like death out there." I laughed it off, but looking back, I wish I had taken those words seriously. The first 2 hours were quiet. I did my initial patrol through floors 4 to 7, checked the locked office doors, and listened to the wind howl against the blacked-out windows. Around midnight, I settled into the security office on the ground floor, a tiny room behind the main lobby, with a space heater humming at my feet and the monitors casting a pale blue glow. That's when the lights flickered for the first time, just a quick blink, and then everything came back steady. I barely looked up. Winter storms messed with the power all the time, but then it happened again, a longer flicker, and all 12 camera feeds on my screen dissolved into waves of gray static. I sat up straight, and before I could even process what was happening, the entire building plunged into complete and total darkness. No emergency lights, no exit signs, nothing. The silence that followed was wrong because the heating system, a constant low rumble I never noticed until it vanished, had gone dead, and the space heater at my feet was suddenly cold. I reached for my heavy-duty maglite, clicked it on, and watched my own breath crystallize in the beam, a cloud of frost blooming in the blackness before me. What the hell, the backup generator should have kicked in by now. I grabbed my 2-way radio, pressed the call button, and got nothing but white noise, thin, crackling, almost like the static was breathing back at me. The cold was already seeping through the walls, not the normal drafty chill of an old building, but a deep, bone-aching cold that felt intentional, like the building was slowly freezing us on purpose. I made a decision. I would head down to the basement level, find the generator room, and manually override the backup system. I knew the layout of that building like the back of my hand. I could walk it blindfolded, and so I stepped out of the office and into the blackened lobby, my flashlight carving a narrow tunnel through the suffocating dark. The lobby was a wide open space, marble floors, a reception desk shaped like a crescent moon, and floor-to-ceiling windows facing the parking lot. But when I glanced toward those windows, I froze mid-step. They were completely frosted over. Not just a little bit of ice on the edges, but completely opaque. Thick white frost crawling on the inside, like winter had forced its way through the glass with claws of ice. I told myself it was just the temperature differential. The storm, something scientific, and I kept walking. The stairwell door to the basement was heavy steel, and when I pushed it open, the cold air that rushed up to meet me smelled wrong. It smelled like frozen dirt and copper and something else, something wet and old. I started descending, my boots clanging on each metal step, the echo ricocheting in ways that made it sound like someone was walking just a few paces behind me. Just the echo, just the echo. I reached the basement level, long concrete corridor, pipes overhead wrapped in insulation, and at the far end, the heavy red door of the generator room. That door was open. Not just unlocked, wide open, and I knew for a fact that I had locked it during my last patrol at 9:45 p.m. A cold knot tightened in my stomach, and for the first time that night, I felt real fear, sharp and electric. I stood there for maybe a full minute, my flashlight trembling in my grip, my breathing shallow and loud in the dead silence. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong in any empty basement. A slow, dragging footstep coming from inside that dark generator room. I didn't run. Not yet, because my brain was still desperately clinging to logic. Maybe a homeless person got in. Maybe maintenance came back for something. I called out, my voice cracking, "Hello? This is security. Identify yourself." The dragging stopped, and the silence that followed was worse than any answer, because in that silence, something inside the generator room inhaled, a long, rattling, wet inhale like air being pulled through a collapsed lung. And then the door, that heavy steel door, slammed shut with such violent force that the concrete floor shook under my boots. My flashlight went out. The bulb didn't flicker or dim, it just died instantly, and I was left standing in absolute blackness, the kind of dark that feels thick, like it has weight. I stumbled backward, dropped the useless flashlight, and ran blindly down that corridor, one hand dragging along the freezing wall to guide me. The stairs, I needed to get back to the stairs, and as I ran, I heard the generator room door open again. Slow groaning, and then those dragging footsteps resumed, but this time they were moving faster, and they were moving toward me. I practically threw myself up the stairwell, climbing 2 steps at a time, my lungs burning from the frozen air, and somewhere below me that dragging sound turned into something else, something that moved on too many limbs, joint cracking, slapping wetly against concrete. I burst out onto the ground floor, slammed the stairwell door behind me, and didn't stop moving until I was back in the security office. I locked the door, shoved a heavy filing cabinet in front of it, and collapsed against the wall, gasping, my heart pounding so hard I could see flashing lights behind my eyes. The office was still dark, but the cold in there was different. It was colder than the lobby, colder than the basement had been. So cold that my tears were starting to freeze on my eyelashes. I tried my radio again, nothing. Tried my cell phone, dead, the screen completely black like the battery had been drained in seconds, and then the intercom system, the building-wide PA that hadn't been used in years, crackled to life above my head. A voice came through, but it wasn't a human voice. It was a whisper made of static and frost, and it said my name, Marcus. The pronunciation was wrong, stretched out, syllables grinding against each other like ice flows. Marcus, I see you. I clamped my hands over my ears, but I could still hear it, not from the speaker anymore, but inside my own head, a freezing whisper seeping through my thoughts. The filing cabinet in front of the door shuddered. Something on the other side pressed against it, testing the resistance, and I heard that wet breathing again, inches away through the wood. I don't know how long I crouched there in the corner, minutes, maybe hours, the cold getting worse and worse, numbness creeping up my fingers and toes, my thoughts slowing down until all I could think about was the dark and the cold and the thing that knew my name. At some point, I started to see it, even in the pitch-black office, a deeper darkness detaching itself from the shadows in the corner, tall, impossibly tall, its limbs bending in places where joints shouldn't exist. It didn't have a face, but it had eyes, two pinpricks of pale blue light that swam in the darkness like distant frozen stars. Those eyes fixed on me, and the cold inside my body intensified until I felt my blood slowing, my heart stumbling in its rhythm. I was dying, freezing to death in a locked office while something ancient and patient watched me fade. But then, maybe God decided it wasn't my time, or maybe the thing wasn't finished playing, because a low rumble vibrated through the walls, and the building's emergency generator finally, impossibly, coughed to life. The fluorescent lights above me blinked on one by one, humming a sickly yellow glow, and I saw the office clearly. I was alone. The filing cabinet was still pressed against the door, but the door was undamaged. The intercom speaker hung silent and dusty, and the corner where that thing had stood was just an empty corner with peeling paint. The heat clicked on warm air flooding the vents, and the CCTV monitors flickered back to life, showing me every quiet, empty, untouched hallway in the building. I sat there shivering until the day shift arrived at 6 a.m. I never told Frank exactly what happened. I just handed in my badge and said I was done. But before I left, I checked the security footage from the night. Every camera had recorded static during the blackout, except for one, the camera facing the lobby windows. For exactly 3 seconds during the outage, the feed cleared up, and it captured something pressed against the glass from the outside, a long hand with too many fingers, fingers that were all bent backward, and the frost on the glass spelled out one word. My name. I still live with the nightmares, and last winter, during a power outage at my new apartment, I woke up to find my bedroom window frosted over from the inside, and somewhere in the white ice I could see the beginning of a letter M. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm a single mother to a 7-year-old girl named Lily. We live in a small farmhouse just outside of Concord, New Hampshire, an old place with creaky floorboards and a basement that always felt a little too cold even in summer. The night it happened, a brutal nor'easter was tearing through the county, winds screaming at 40 miles an hour, and the weather radio warning of widespread power outages before midnight. Lily was already anxious. She hated storms, so I let her camp out in my bed, a rare treat, and we snuggled under 2 heavy quilts while the house groaned around us. The power died at exactly 11:42 p.m. I remember because the digital clock on my nightstand blinked out, and the sudden silence that followed was almost aggressive, like the storm had been holding its breath. The darkness was instant and complete. No streetlights out here, no neighbors for half a mile, just the inky black of rural New Hampshire pressing against every window. I fumbled for the flashlight I kept in my nightstand drawer, clicked it on, and watched my breath plume in the narrow beam. The temperature was already dropping fast. Lily whimpered beside me, her small body burrowing closer, and I whispered that everything was okay, that it was just a blackout, and we'd wait it out together. I had no idea, none, that within the hour I would hear my daughter's voice calling to me from somewhere else in the house. The first 40 minutes were uneventful, just the two of us huddled in bed, me telling Lily silly stories about summer camping trips to keep her mind off the dark. She drifted off around midnight, her breathing evening out into that soft, steady rhythm I knew so well, and I felt her warmth pressed against my side, a small anchor in the freezing black. I stayed awake, listening to the wind and trying to calculate how long it would take for the house to become dangerously cold. That's when I heard it, faint at first, a voice coming from somewhere below us. Mommy. The word was muffled, distant, but unmistakable. It was Lily's voice, the same pitch, the same gentle rise at the end when she was scared. My heart lurched, but I immediately told myself it was the wind or a trick of the storm, because Lily was right here. I could feel her small hand resting on my arm. I looked down at her with the flashlight, her face peaceful, chest rising and falling, absolutely asleep. Then the voice came again. Closer this time, clearer. Mommy, I'm scared. Where are you? It was coming from the basement. I was certain of it, drifting up through the heating vents in the floor. My mouth went dry, and I could hear my own breathing become shallow and ragged, a cold dread coiling in my stomach like a living thing. I told myself it was impossible, absolutely impossible. Lily is right here, her small body generating warmth under the quilt, her hair smelling like strawberry shampoo, but the voice kept calling, and it started to sound more distressed, more urgent. "Mommy, please. It's so dark down here, I can't find the stairs." Every word was exactly my daughter, the way she said "down here" with that slight lisp on the S, the way her voice quivered when she was on the verge of tears. I felt tears prick my own eyes because some deep primal part of my brain was screaming at me to go to my child, even though my child was literally pressed against my ribs. I carefully extricated myself from the blankets, grabbed the flashlight with a trembling hand, and crept toward the bedroom door. The hallway outside was a black throat, and the cold in the house had intensified dramatically. I could see my breath in thick clouds now, and the wooden floor was so cold it burned my bare feet. I stepped into the hall, and the basement door was at the far end, just past the bathroom, a narrow wooden door that I always kept locked with a deadbolt. The door was closed, but as I stood there, frozen, the voice came through it, and now it was crying. "Mommy, you forgot me. You left me down here in the dark." A sob choked out of the vent near my feet, and I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from screaming, because that sob was identical to the one Lily made when she had a nightmare. I rushed back into the bedroom, slammed the door, and locked it with fingers that could barely function. Then I pressed my back against the wood and slid down to the floor, gasping. Lily was still asleep. Miraculously, her little chest rising and falling, completely unaware that something downstairs was wearing her voice like a stolen coat. I sat there shaking for what felt like an eternity, the voice still calling periodically, sometimes soft, sometimes a shriek of pure terror that made my teeth ache. "Mommy, it's touching me. Something cold is touching my face." I covered my ears, but I could still hear it, and worse, I started hearing footsteps on the basement stairs, slow, deliberate, the creak of each individual wooden step. That basement staircase had 13 steps. I had counted them 100 times doing laundry, and now I heard something climbing them one by one, a dragging sound accompanying each footfall. By the time the footsteps reached the top of the stairs, the voice was directly on the other side of the basement door, separated from me by just the hallway and my bedroom door. And then the basement door handle rattled. I heard it, that distinctive metallic jiggle, and the lock held, but the rattling became more violent, the whole door shaking in its frame, and the voice became a distorted howl. "Let me in, Mommy. Why won't you open the door?" The voice cracked on the last word, slipping out of Lily's register into something deeper, something that vibrated in the walls. Lily finally stirred in the bed, and my heart stopped, because if she woke up and heard that thing calling, if she heard her own voice screaming from the basement, I scrambled to the bed and wrapped my arms around her, holding her tight as she blinked sleepily. "Mommy, what's that noise?" she murmured, and I whispered that it was just the storm, just the wind. "Go back to sleep, baby. Please go back to sleep." She nestled into my chest, and miraculously, she did, but my eyes stayed locked on the bedroom door. The rattling at the basement door stopped, and for a few moments there was silence, but that silence was worse, because I knew something was still there, thinking, waiting. Then the voice returned, but now it was directly outside my bedroom door, no more than 3 inches of wood separating us from it. It spoke softly, gently, in Lily's most tender bedtime voice. "Mommy, you're hugging the wrong one." I looked down at the child in my arms, my flashlight illuminating her sleeping face. Her skin was cold, too cold for someone wrapped in quilts, and for one horrifying second I doubted everything. I pressed my ear to her chest and heard her heartbeat steady, real, my daughter, my real daughter. But the thing outside the door laughed, a perfect mimic of Lily's giggle, and then it whispered, "Are you sure? Check again." I didn't check again. I pulled the quilt over both of us and held Lily so tight she whimpered in her sleep. And I started praying, prayers I hadn't said since I was a child in Sunday school. The voice continued all night, shifting locations, sometimes from the attic above us, sometimes from the closet across the room, always Lily's voice, always pleading, always accusing. "You're a bad mommy." Bad mommies let their little girls freeze in the dark. The cold became unbearable, frost forming on the inside of the bedroom windows, my fingers numb, and I realized with dawning horror that whatever was in my house, it was feeding on the cold, growing stronger as the temperature dropped. Around 400 a.m., the voice changed tactics. It started singing, a lullaby I used to sing to Lily when she was a baby, a made-up little tune that only we knew. "Hush now, little star mommy's here, not too far." The singing was beautiful and terrible, note for note, word for word, a song that had never been recorded, never sung to anyone else, something buried deep in the private history of our little family. My blood ran cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature, because how could anything know that song unless it had been in Lily's head? Unless it could read her memories, unless it was using her own thoughts as a blueprint to break me. I wept silently into Lily's hair, hot tears freezing on my cheeks, and I told myself that whatever happened, I would not open that door. At 5:17 a.m., the power returned. It didn't flicker or fade in gradually, it just snapped back with a loud thud as the furnace kicked on, and every light in the bedroom blazed to life simultaneously. I blinked in the sudden brightness, my eyes burning, and I heard one final sound from the hallway. A long, slow exhale, as if something was releasing a breath it had been holding for hours, then silence, normal silence. The hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the tick of the grandfather clock in the living room, the distant dying winds of the storm. I didn't move for another hour. Not until pale gray dawn light started creeping through the frost-rimed windows. When I finally unlocked the bedroom door, I did it with a kitchen knife in one hand and my phone in the other, even though I knew the phone was probably useless. The hallway was empty. The basement door was still closed, but the deadbolt, which I knew I had locked before bed, was now unlocked, and the door stood slightly ajar, a finger's width of black space. I didn't go down there, I couldn't. I called my brother in tears, and he drove over from Manchester, and together we searched the house from top to bottom. We found nothing, no sign of forced entry, no footprints in the snow outside, nothing. Except in the basement, on the concrete floor directly below the stairs, there was a patch of ice, perfectly circular, about 3 feet in diameter, and in the center of that ice, 2 small handprints, child-sized, pressed into the frozen surface as if someone had been trying to push themselves up. My brother said it was probably an old leak, something about condensation, but the look on his face told me he didn't believe a word of it. That night I packed a bag for Lily and me, and we stayed at a hotel, and then another hotel, and I never slept in that farmhouse again. I put it on the market a month later, sold it at a loss, and moved us to a small apartment in a busy part of Concord where the streetlights never go dark and the neighbors are close enough to hear you scream. Lily is 9 now, and she doesn't remember much about that night, or at least she never speaks of it. But sometimes during a bad storm, when the lights flicker, I catch her staring at the nearest door with an expression that is far too old for her face, and once, just once, I heard her humming that lullaby under her breath. When I asked her where she learned that song, she looked at me with those innocent blue eyes and said, "The cold mommy taught me. I still sleep with the lights on, and I always keep a flashlight in every room." My name is David Kowalski, and I used to think I understood the cold. I grew up in northern Minnesota, where winter temperatures drop to 30 below and the wind off Lake Superior can freeze exposed skin in under a minute. I was a lineman for the power company, 22 years on the job. I've climbed frozen poles in blizzards, repaired downed lines in whiteout conditions, and I never once feared the weather. But there was a night in February of 2021, a blackout unlike any I'd ever seen, and a cold that even now I cannot escape. It started with a routine call. A massive ice storm had swept through the Arrowhead region, coating every tree and power line in half an inch of solid ice. By sundown, nearly the entire county had gone dark, and the dispatch radio crackled with reports of downed lines scattered across 100 square miles. My partner Tom Bergstrom and I were assigned to the northernmost sector, a stretch of isolated forest roads that led toward the Canadian border where a critical substation had failed. We loaded up the bucket truck with chainsaws and emergency gear and headed into the storm just as the last gray light of afternoon bled away into blackness. The roads were treacherous, a skating rink of black ice, and Tom drove with both hands white-knuckled on the wheel while I stared out the window into the swirling dark. The headlights barely pierced 50 feet ahead, the falling sleet reflecting back at us like a million tiny mirrors. And the radio became nothing but static after we passed the last town. "This is going to be a long night," Tom muttered, his breath fogging the windshield despite the heater running full blast. I nodded, but something felt off. The cold inside the cab was too aggressive, seeping through the door seals, curling around my ankles like icy water. The heater was fighting a losing battle, and I noticed the temperature gauge on the dash was dropping steadily. 12 degrees, 8.4 by the time we reached the substation, a fenced compound in a clearing surrounded by dense pine forest. The thermometer read -2. The substation was dead, the massive transformers looming in the darkness like silent metal tombs, and the emergency lights that should have been running on battery backup were completely dark. Tom parked the truck, and we sat there for a moment, listening to the wind scream through the trees, and I saw something that made my stomach tighten. The fence surrounding the substation, a 12-foot chain-link barrier topped with razor wire, was covered in frost. But the frost was on the inside, like the cold was radiating outward from the equipment itself. "You see that?" I whispered, and Tom just stared, his face pale in the dashboard glow. We should have turned around right then, driven back to town and reported the situation to dispatch, but we were experienced professionals, and we had a job to do. We pulled on our heavy gear, Arctic-rated coveralls, thick gloves, and climbed out of the truck into the screaming wind. The cold hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs, and I felt the moisture in my nostrils freeze instantly. Tom grabbed the chainsaw and headed toward the substation gate while I wrestled with the heavy bolt cutters to open the lock. But when I touched the chain, my glove stuck to the metal, frozen solid on contact. It took both of us to wrench the gate open, and the sound it made wasn't the usual screech of rusty hinges. It was a low, resonant groan, like the earth itself was in pain. Inside the substation compound, the cold was even worse, and I started noticing things that didn't make sense. The snow on the ground was blackened, not dirty but black, like it had been charred by something that burned cold instead of hot. The air smelled strange too, metallic and sharp, like ozone mixed with something ancient and dead. "This isn't normal," Tom said over the howl of the wind, and I could hear the tremor in his voice. We located the primary transformer that had failed, a hulking piece of machinery coated in ice so thick it looked like a frozen waterfall, and Tom started cutting away the fallen branches with the chainsaw while I inspected the control panel. The panel door hung open, and inside, the wires were not just frozen, they were shattered, like something had snapped them from within. I reached out to check the breaker, and the moment my gloved hand touched the metal box, every hair on my body stood on end, not from electricity, but from something else, a presence that felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer full of whispered voices. And then the chainsaw died. Tom pulled the starter cord again and again, but the engine refused to turn over, and in the sudden silence, I heard something moving in the tree line. Not an animal, nothing natural, a sound like cracking ice, rhythmic, approaching. I swept my flashlight toward the pines, and for one brief second I saw a shape tall and thin, its outline shimmering like heat distortion, except it radiated cold instead of warmth. The beam flickered, and when it steadied, the shape was gone. But the cracking sound was closer, now coming from somewhere behind the transformer. "We need to leave, now," I said, grabbing Tom's arm. We stumbled back toward the truck, our boots crunching on the blackened snow, and I fumbled for the door handle. But the entire driver's side of the vehicle was encased in ice that had not been there 5 minutes earlier. The ice was smooth and transparent, but when I pressed my flashlight against it, I could see shapes trapped inside handprints, dozens of them, pressed outward from within the truck as if someone had been trying to escape. Tom started praying under his breath, and I tried the passenger door. Same thing. Frozen solid, the lock mechanism useless, the windows opaque with frost. The cracking sound was all around us now, and the temperature was plummeting so fast I could feel my thoughts slowing, my vision narrowing, a deep, bone-deep exhaustion settling into my limbs. That's when the substation, the entire compound, was plunged into a darkness so absolute that even my flashlight couldn't penetrate it more than a few inches. A cold blackout, not just the absence of light, but the absence of warmth on a molecular level, the kind of cold that exists in the void between stars. And in that darkness, a voice spoke. But not with sound, it spoke directly into my mind, a voice made of frozen fractals and the creak of ancient glaciers. "The light will not return. The warmth is gone. You belong to the cold now." Tom screamed, a raw animal sound, and I heard him running, his footsteps crunching away into the forest, and I tried to call after him, but my jaw was locked, frozen. I forced my legs to move, stumbled blindly toward where I remembered the gate being, and the darkness pressed against me like heavy wool, suffocating, intimate. I don't remember getting out of the compound. I don't remember collapsing, but the next thing I knew, I was lying on my back in the snow, and the sky above me was pale gray. Dawn had arrived, a weak, watery dawn, the sun a dim white disk barely visible through the clouds. I could move again, the crippling cold had eased just enough for me to sit up, and I saw the substation behind me, silent, abandoned, the truck still encased in its tomb of ice. But Tom was gone. I searched the perimeter for 2 hours, calling his name until my throat was raw. And I never found him, not his body, not his footprints, nothing. The rescue crew arrived at midday. They found me sitting on the running board of the truck, shivering, unable to speak in full sentences. They searched the area for 3 days. Helicopters, dogs, and Tom Bergstrom was never seen again. Officially, he was listed as a missing person, lost in the storm, but I know the truth. I know what took him, and the cold never went away. I feel it even now, a year and a half later, sitting in my living room in broad daylight, the thermostat set to 75, and I'm still freezing. My wife brings me blankets, hot tea. She doesn't understand. The doctors don't understand. They say my circulation is fine, my thyroid is normal, but I'm always cold. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up to find frost on my pillow, my breath misting in the dark, and I hear that voice again, whispering from the corner of the room. "You escaped the substation, but you will never escape us. We are in your bones." I've started seeing Tom in my dreams. He's standing in a frozen forest, his skin blue, his eyes wide open and filled with frost. And he keeps trying to tell me something, but no sound comes out. Last week, the power went out in my neighborhood. Just a brief outage, maybe 10 minutes, and the moment the lights died, the temperature in my house dropped 30 degrees in under 60 seconds. My wife felt it, my children felt it, and we all saw the frost crawling up the inside of the living room windows, spiraling into patterns that looked like the faces of the dead. The power came back, the house warmed up, but the frost on the windows didn't melt, not for 3 days, and when it finally did, there were words written in the condensation. Dawn came, but the cold remains. I keep a journal now, documenting every time I feel the temperature drop, every time I hear that crackling sound outside my door, because I believe something followed me home that night, something ancient and patient, something that will wait until the next great blackout to finish what it started. And I'll tell you something that keeps me awake at night. I've noticed a pattern every power outage in my county for the past 18 months. has occurred on the exact same stretch of grid where Tom and I made our last call. The utility reports say it's equipment failure, ice damage. But I've driven out there, I've seen the crews working, and they look scared. They look like men who have glimpsed something they can't explain. One of them, a young kid named Reynolds, pulled me aside last month and asked me, "Mr. Kowalski, have you ever seen ice that burns when you touch it?" I told him yes, and I told him to quit his job. He didn't listen, and 3 nights ago, during a scheduled maintenance outage, he disappeared. They found his truck idling at the substation gate, driver's door open, and the entire inside of the cab coated in frost, even though the engine had been running for 6 hours. I know what happened to him, the same thing that happened to Tom, the same thing that will eventually happen to me, because the cold doesn't forget, and it never ever lets go. Even now, as I record this message for your channel, I can feel it listening. The thermostat in my hallway just dropped 4 degrees in the last 2 minutes, and I can see my breath forming in the air. If you're watching this, and you live somewhere cold, somewhere where the winters are long and the nights are deep, I'm begging you, the next time a blackout hits and you feel a chill that goes beyond normal cold, a chill that seems to have a mind of its own, don't investigate, don't go outside, don't try to fix anything, just run as far and as fast as you can and never look back, because some lights, once they go out, are never meant to shine again, and some cold, once it finds you, will follow you until the day you die, and maybe even beyond. And now you've witnessed the darkness. 3 souls who stepped into a cold blackout and never truly came back the same. These weren't campfire ghost stories. These were true terror files, whispered confessions from people who now live with the lights burning every single night. If you made it to the end, thank you for walking through the freezing unknown with me. Your time, your attention, your willingness to sit alone in the shadows, it means more than I can ever express. This channel exists to give a voice to those who've seen what can't be explained, and every view, every like, every comment tells the world that their stories matter. So right now, before the cold in your room creeps any closer, smash that like button. It's the only warmth that fights the algorithm's darkness. Subscribe and ring the bell. We unearth new real-life horrors. And you do not want to be left alone in the silence when the next video drops. Drop 1 word in the comments which story stole your sleep. The frozen security office, the basement mimic, or the ancient cold that follows you home. I read every single response, and your chilling reactions often become the seed for our next investigation. Until we meet again, keep your flashlight fully charged, hold your loved ones tight, and never ever open the door when the lights go out.